The door had been closed for hours. I didn't know if it was day or night anymore. The window had bars, and no sunlight came through, only silence, and the muffled sound of footsteps outside. I never imagined that my own daughter, the girl I once held in my arms and cared for with all my heart, would one day do this to me. But there I was, locked in, sitting on the edge of a bed that wasn't mine, staring at a door that refused to open. She had promised me peace. She used sweet words, as if offering a gift. "Mom, come live with me. You'll be taken care of. You'll rest. You'll have everything." And I believed her. Because we always want to believe in our children, even when our instincts whisper that something's not right. That first day, everything seemed fine. A new room, clean, not very spacious, but with a soft bed. "It's just temporary, Mom," she said, smiling. "We'll fix up the house properly soon." I smiled back, trying to ignore the tight feeling in my chest. But the next morning, something changed. The door, which had been left open the day before, was shut hard. The latch turned from the outside. I heard a key click. I thought it was a mistake. I knocked gently, called out. No answer. Hours passed. I heard laughter in the kitchen, dishes being washed, phone conversations, but no voice addressed me. When I tried the door again, I realized I wasn't there as a guest. I was a burden, a nuisance, something that needed to be hidden. In the days that followed, they brought me cold food at random times. Sometimes they left the plate on the floor, like I was an animal. They wouldn't let me use the bathroom, only a chamber pot in the corner of the room. And worse, my daughter. My daughter laughed whenever I tried to talk. She said it was for my safety. Me who had been a teacher. Me who gave everything so she could go to school. Me who worked 2 jobs so nothing would ever be missing at home. Now, I was being treated like garbage. Like something disposable. That night, I leaned my head against the wall and started remembering when she was little. The notes she used to write saying she loved me. The tight hugs when I came home from work. When did it all go wrong? That's when I heard the sentence I'll never forget. A voice outside, probably my son-in-law's, muffled but clear. "She's not going anywhere anytime soon. It's better this way." And in that moment, something inside me broke. But I didn't cry. I didn't scream. I just closed my eyes and took a deep breath. I knew what I had to do. If you've made it this far, then this story has probably touched you in some way. So go ahead and like this video, subscribe to the channel, and turn on notifications because there's so much more truth coming. And tell me in the comments, have you ever trusted someone only to be betrayed in the coldest way? Your story might be exactly what someone else needs to read to change their life. My name is Margaret. I'm 76 years old, and until a few months ago, lived alone in the same house where I spent more than 5 decades of my life. That little house wasn't fancy. The paint was faded in the front, the wood creaked when it rained, and the heater made an odd humming noise in the winter, but it was mine. It held the smell of old books, lavender, and coffee, everything that made my life feel familiar, even after I lost my husband, Robert. He passed away just before Christmas last year. One moment, we were sitting at the table, laughing over a crossword puzzle. The next, I was holding his cold hand, calling 911, screaming into the phone like a scared little girl. That day shattered me in ways I still don't have words for. Grief isn't a straight road. It's a dark forest, and I was walking it alone. The silence in the house grew heavier with every sunset. I stopped opening the curtains. Meals became toast and tea. The radio played softly, mostly classical, but even the music couldn't drown the sound of my own loneliness. That's when my daughter Jessica called. "Mom, you don't have to be alone," she said. "Come live with us. You'll have your own room, your own space, and we'll take care of you. You'll have peace." I remember that exact word, peace. It sounded like an answer to my prayers, and so, I said yes. She and her husband, Samuel, picked me up one sunny afternoon. My bags were light, just clothes, a few photo albums, and the small wooden box where I keep Robert's letters. The ride was quiet. Jessica talked about her new promotion. Samuel mentioned his long shifts at the clinic, and I smiled politely. I was grateful. I really was. In my heart, I told myself I'd be useful. I could help fold the laundry, prepare simple meals, maybe even help with their daughter, Emily, who had just turned 16. I imagined evenings on the porch, drinking tea, watching the stars together. I imagined laughter. The first days were smooth. Jessica cooked dinner every evening. She sat next to me, asked how I was feeling. Emily showed me her room and even helped me set up my things in the guest room. Samuel brought me fresh flowers from the store and placed them in a vase on my nightstand. I remember thinking, maybe this will work. Maybe God is giving me a new chapter. I even started walking again in the mornings. Their neighborhood was quiet, lined with trees and chirping birds, so I would stroll slowly, letting the sun kiss my skin, feeling just barely alive again. But peace has a way of disappearing without warning. Small things began to change. At first, I thought I was imagining them. Jessica stopped asking if I wanted tea. Then, she asked me to stay in my room while Samuel held meetings in the dining room, just for an hour. "Mom," she said with a sweet smile, "you know how sound carries." So I stayed. Emily, who used to sit with me to paint her nails and chat about school, began closing her door. One day, I overheard her telling a friend on the phone, "I swear, it's like having a ghost in the house." The bedroom door began to stay closed more often. I wasn't locked in, not at first, but then came the second week. One morning, I turned the handle and realized it wouldn't open. "Mom, just for today, okay? There's a lot going on downstairs," Jessica said through the door. "We'll bring your meals." I stood there, hand trembling on the knob, waiting for her to say she was joking, but all I heard was her footsteps walking away. I sat on the bed. I looked at the window. I looked at Robert's picture, and I waited. The meals kept coming, but always late, and always cold. Samuel brought them in silence, sometimes Emily. No one made eye contact. I asked for books. They never arrived. I asked for my radio. Jessica said it was broken. I asked to stretch my legs. "Soon, Mom. Just rest." I began writing notes on napkins, on the margins of magazines. I wrote down the days. I counted how many hours passed between meals. I wrote Robert a letter I never intended to send. I asked him if this was what our love led to, if my life, after everything, would end in a room with no name, behind a door that no longer opened. By the end of the week, I no longer recognized the sound of my own voice. I stopped asking questions. I began listening. And one night, I heard them laughing, soft voices, muffled, but close enough. I heard my name. "She's just taking up space," Jessica said. "I told you, Sam. We'll figure it out." She doesn't even remember half the stuff anymore. I sat on the edge of the bed, holding my breath, holding my knees like I used to when I was a child afraid of the dark. But this wasn't fear of monsters. This was something deeper. This was betrayal dressed in kindness. I was their burden, not their guest, not their mother, not even a woman anymore, just an inconvenience. Have you ever been surrounded by people and still felt completely invisible? Comment below if you believe that real love doesn't lock doors, it opens them. The day the door clicked shut from the outside, something inside Margaret also closed. She was 76, recently widowed, and had moved in with her daughter Jessica and son-in-law Samuel, thinking she was escaping the cold silence of her empty home. Instead, she had walked into a quiet storm she hadn't yet seen coming. It started with small things, the sort of details one brushes off as oversights when hope still lives. A missed knock before entering, a forgotten plate at dinner, a whisper that dies when she steps into the room. At first, Margaret believed in kindness. She believed that Jessica had meant it when she said, "You'll never be alone again, Mom." But promises are easy to break when spoken for appearances. It didn't take long for the warmth to dissolve. Her world shrank from the spacious house she once had to a single guest room at the end of the hallway, with curtains that were never drawn and lights that were rarely turned on. Then came the lock. Jessica told her it was just for her safety, claiming she worried that Margaret might wander at night or forget the stove was on. But Margaret had never been forgetful. She read books, she solved puzzles, she remembered every birthday in the family without help. And yet, the lock turned every night, then it stopped turning back in the morning. She began to notice her meals weren't being shared anymore. Instead, food appeared on a tray left silently on the floor outside her door, always cold, sometimes untouched, like someone had tossed it together with no thought. The door wouldn't open unless someone felt like unlocking it. She called for Jessica a few times, but the response was always delayed, or worse, ignored. One morning, Margaret reached for her phone, only to find it gone. It was outdated. Jessica had said when she finally confronted her, "I'll get you a new one." The new one never came. Days passed in silence. The television didn't work. The small window was too high to reach. Her world had collapsed into four walls and a locked door. No longer a member of the family, but a ghost in a house that once promised safety. She felt time dragging with painful clarity. The conversations outside became more distant. Laughter that once comforted now sounded like knives. She caught phrases, fragments of a language not meant for her ears. "She's too old to know. Don't bother explaining. We can't keep babysitting her." And so Margaret began to keep track of the days by scratching the wall behind the dresser. She wrote letters to herself on torn notebook pages, trying to hold on to her sense of self. "You are not crazy," she wrote. "You are not invisible." She traced the names of her late husband and her youth over and over, a small rebellion in ink against the prison of neglect. But what really changed everything was the silence after the laughter. It wasn't quiet, it was the weight of being forgotten. And in that silence, Margaret made a decision. If no one would hear her voice through words, perhaps they would hear it through truth. What would you do if the people you trusted the most slowly turned your life into a cage? Leave a comment and tell us, where do you draw the line between care and control? The days blended into one another like a fog that refused to lift. Margaret no longer knew what hour it was, or even which day of the week. The light bulb in her room had blown out 2 nights ago, and no one had bothered to replace it. When the door opened, it was only for a minute, just long enough to place a tray of food on the floor and close it again without a word. Cold vegetables, dry bread, once a cracked cup of lukewarm tea. There were no greetings, no conversations, just the sound of the key turning, the mechanical echo of rejection. Every clink of the metal against the lock reminded her that this wasn't a home anymore. It was a cell, and she wasn't a mother. She was a memory, being erased, one ignored moment at a time. Her body began to ache, not from illness, but from stillness. Her joints stiffened, her back throbbed, and even her breathing felt heavier, slower, as if matching the pace of time that dragged endlessly on. The small window in her room barely let in any light. She couldn't tell morning from afternoon, only hunger from numbness. She kept track of days by how many meals she received. 3 meant it was still a day. 2 meant they'd forgotten. 1 meant she had become invisible again. Even baths had rules now. Once a week, someone would open the door, hand her a towel, and wait outside the bath while she washed. The water was always cold. They said the heater was broken, but it wasn't. She had heard the shower running in the hallway bathroom just an hour before. It was never broken for them, just for her. Lights out came early, not because she was tired, but because someone from outside would flip the switch through the circuit box and end her evening without warning. She sat in the dark with only her thoughts for company, wrapping her arms around her knees like she used to when she was a child afraid of thunder. And then, one night, in the middle of that darkness, came the memories. Jessica used to be gentle. When she was 5, she would climb into Margaret's lap and trace circles on her mother's palm. She would call her mommy with a softness that melted anything cold in the room. Margaret remembered Jessica's first ballet recital, the night she got her first A in school, the day she cried over her first heartbreak. Back then, Margaret had been the safe place, the protector, the one with all the answers. So how did they get here? Margaret searched herself for the cracks. Had she been too strict, too soft? Did she push too hard, or not hard enough? She played the past like an old song, hoping to hear the moment the melody changed, when the affection in Jessica's eyes had turned into distance. She remembered baking cookies, helping with homework, whispering bedtime stories through the crack of a door left open on purpose. She wasn't perfect. No mother is, but she had loved her daughter with a loyalty that could break bones for her if needed. And now that same daughter kept her behind a locked door, not with anger, not with shouting, but with something worse, indifference. The pain wasn't in being forgotten. It was in being remembered and still being left behind. Margaret pressed her palm against the wall. She closed her eyes and whispered Jessica's name, not the name of the adult who fed her cold food and turned off the lights, but the child who used to curl beside her on stormy nights. The child who once cried when her goldfish died and made Margaret promise she'd never leave. She hadn't broken that promise, but maybe Jessica had. Have you ever felt like you gave your all and were repaid with silence? Comment below and share your story. Someone might need your courage to find their own. The house had become a place of hushed voices and silent glances. Luke, just 14, wasn't supposed to notice much, but he did. He noticed the way his mother Jessica lowered her voice every time she passed the door to his grandmother Margaret's room. He noticed how conversations stopped abruptly whenever he entered the kitchen or the living room. At first, he thought it was just his imagination. Maybe they were talking about grown-up things, but then, late one evening, when he went to grab his charger, he stood there, hidden behind the pantry door, the words hanging in the air like a thick fog. His Aunt Sarah responded, her tone laced with annoyance. She barely eats. She doesn't speak to anyone. That room might as well be empty. They laughed. His stomach twisted. He wanted to storm in, scream, demand an explanation, but something told him to wait, to listen, to understand the full truth. Over the next few days, Luke started paying closer attention. He watched as his mom avoided Margaret's room, lest it was to slide a tray of food inside. He noticed how she kept the blinds drawn in that part of the house. One afternoon, when Jessica left to run errands, he walked past the hallway and paused. The door to his grandmother's room was unlocked. That was new. He knocked softly. No answer. When he pushed the door open, the light was dim. Margaret sat on the bed, staring at nothing. Her eyes moved. She blinked and finally, after what felt like hours, nodded. Her voice was dry and faint. Luke, that was all she said, but it was enough. In that single word, he heard everything: loneliness, confusion, hope. He reached out and held her hand. That's when he noticed the notebook beside her pillow. It was worn and creased. The cover faded. Curious, he opened it. Page after page filled with her handwriting. Not just grocery lists or to-do reminders. These were journal entries. Raw, painful reflections. Day 12. No sunlight again today. Jessica didn't speak to me. I think I'm a burden now. Day 15. I dreamed of Harold last night. He told me to be brave. Day 19. I heard them laugh. They think I can't hear, but I hear everything. Luke read in silence, his eyes stinging. Every entry was a cry his GI. He put the notebook down gently and looked at her. Why didn't you tell me? He asked, but she didn't answer. Maybe she couldn't. Maybe she'd been silenced so long she forgot how to speak her pain out loud. That night, he didn't sleep. He lay in his bed replaying every moment he had ignored, every time he heard her name and let it pass. He thought about the smiles his mother gave him at dinner, the same mouth that called her own mother useless behind closed doors. The next morning, he confronted Jessica, not with shouting, not with rage. He stood in the kitchen holding the notebook, his eyes locked on hers. I read it, he said. Her face turned pale. You don't know what you're talking about. She tried, but her voice was shaky. Don't lie, he replied. I read everything. There was a long pause before she turned away. You wouldn't understand. But he did. He understood more than she thought, that she had reduced his grandmother to a transaction, that love had been replaced by convenience, and that sometimes monsters don't live under the bed. They sit at the table, serving breakfast like everything's fine. Have you ever uncovered something that changed how you see your own family? Tell us in the comments. Your voice might be the lifeline someone else needs. The silence in the house had become deafening, not in the peaceful way people romanticize, but in the kind that screamed beneath the surface. It wrapped around me like a fog, thick and suffocating, pressing into my chest with every breath I tried to take. I remember the way Jessica once used to laugh, that innocent sound when she was little, running barefoot in the yard, calling me mommy with those wide eyes. That memory kept me warm on nights when all I had was the wall, the locked door, and the tiny sliver of light under it. I never imagined that same voice would one day call me a burden, but life plays cruel tricks on the trusting. My name is Eleanor, I am 78 years old, and I spent 7 days locked in a room, not by strangers, but by the very people who were supposed to protect me. My daughter Jessica promised me peace, love, comfort. Come stay with us, she said after my husband died. You'll never be alone again. The first few days were gentle. Tea in the mornings, blankets folded on my bed, her son Ethan giving me those shy teenage hugs. But slowly, the kindness faded. The door started closing earlier. The meals became colder. The phone disappeared. Then came the key, turning from the outside. At first I told myself it was temporary. Maybe she was afraid I'd fall down the stairs. Maybe it was for my safety. But then came the conversations I wasn't meant to hear. Words, not whispered, but thrown like stones. She doesn't even know what day it is. We need her check to cover the mortgage. Just keep the door locked and tell her she's confused. The betrayal didn't come like a knife, it came like a slow drowning, and I sank silently while my own daughter watched. But Ethan, my sweet, observant Ethan, noticed. He saw the meals untouched outside my door. He heard the silence stretching too long. He felt the absence of laughter where it used to be. And one night, he slid a note under the door. I'm here. Don't give up. I remember holding that note in my hands like it was a lifeline. I cried harder than I had since my husband died. The next day, a whisper through the door, write everything down. Grandma, I'll help. And so I wrote. Every word, every slight, every humiliation. Ethan, that quiet boy with the skateboard and worn-out sneakers, became my voice. He recorded their conversations, the ones where they mocked me, called me a burden, laughed about my locked door. He filmed the untouched meals, the darkness in my room. Then he took all of it to someone who still had integrity, Mr. Langford, the family lawyer who had known me and my husband since our wedding. They didn't wait. I was taken to the doctor, examined, tested, questioned with respect. The results were clear. I was not delusional. I was not sick. I was neglected, starved, emotionally abused, and I was very aware of it all. That awareness, the clarity I still held, became my weapon. The police arrived quietly, respectfully. The officer's voice was calm when he called out my name. I stepped out of that room, not with a scream, but with silence more powerful than any words. Jessica stood in the kitchen, mouth open. Samuel muttered excuses. Ethan stood tall beside me. The hallway that once confined me became my escape route. I walked through it slowly, holding Ethan's hand, each step reclaiming a piece of myself they tried to erase. I now live in a cottage by the woods, nothing fancy. Just peace, the kind of peace that comes from knowing no one can lock your door again. Ethan visits daily. He brings me flowers, new books, and every Sunday, a fresh notebook. I write, not just about pain, but about resilience. I survived because someone believed I still mattered. That belief, that love, saved me. And now, I ask, you, have you ever been someone's only light in the dark? Or has someone ever become yours? Tell me in the comments. Someone out there may need your story more than you think. Freedom is not a luxury. It's the quiet dignity of waking up each day knowing your worth is no longer negotiable. When I first stepped into this small cottage nestled on the edge of the village, I didn't feel like a guest or a patient. I felt human again. The air was different. It didn't carry the weight of judgment. The walls didn't whisper insults or slam shut with bitterness. And the light sunlight, pure and untamed, spilled through the windows like it was welcoming me back to life itself. I hadn't felt that in years. Not since before the loneliness crept in behind the curtains of a house I once called home. I unpacked my things slowly, savoring the process. Each folded sweater, every old book, was a piece of who I was before the silence. I placed a picture of my late husband on the bedside table and sat beside it for a moment, not crying, just remembering. He would have been proud, not just of my escape but of the fight I didn't let kill my spirit. Ethan came by that afternoon. He didn't knock, he never had to. The boy who once skated through life without a care now stepped into my world like a guardian. He brought me garden gloves, seeds, and a mug that said, "You matter." He smiled and said, "Let's make this place bloom, Grandma." And bloom we did. That Sunday, we planted tulips first, bright reds and yellows like courage and joy. Then came lavender for peace. We turned the dirt over like we were turning a new page in a book only we could write. I found strength in those moments, not just in the soil or the flowers, but in his presence. Every visit was a balm to the bruises nobody could see. He brought stories from school, jokes he knew would make me laugh, and questions about the world, and I gave him wisdom, not the kind from books, but the kind born from pain, endurance, and watching too much love rot into disappointment. Sometimes we sat in silence, and that silence was beautiful. It wasn't the silence of locked doors or stolen voices, it was the silence of peace, the kind that only comes when someone sees your scars and chooses to sit beside them, not look away. I began journaling again, this time not out of survival, but reflection. I wrote of resilience, of rediscovering self-worth. One afternoon, I wrote, "Sometimes, who you raise with love gives you back cruelty, but real love always finds its way back to you. Even if it wears skate shoes and a shy grin." Ethan read it and said, "I'll never let anyone silence you again." And I believed him. Because love that fights for you isn't weak, it's sacred. We built rituals. Tea on Thursdays, gardening on Sundays, letters on the first of each month. He called them our anti-forgetting pact. I told him that forgetting is what lets the world erase voices like mine. And he said, "Then we'll remember loudly." I saw color come back into my cheeks. I stood taller. I cooked again. I laughed again. I even danced, once, barefoot in the grass, while Ethan filmed it on his phone. It became our joke. Viral grandma strikes again. But behind the laughter was healing. And behind that healing was something stronger: freedom. Because freedom isn't about running away. It's about returning to yourself, reclaiming your name, your breath, your space. And in that space, planting something only you and those who truly love you will water. My flowers bloom now, bright, defiant, soft, just like me. And maybe, just maybe, someone else will see them and know they, too, deserve to bloom. So I ask you, have you ever had to fight to be seen again? Or has someone fought for your light when it flickered low? Tell your story in the comments. Because sometimes, your words are the seed that makes someone else grow. They thought they had silenced me, that a locked door, a meal left on the floor, and indifferent glances would be enough to erase me. But they forgot someone who has already survived the death of a husband. The loneliness of years, and being forgotten by the world, doesn't disappear that easily. What they didn't know was that even in silence, I was being seen. Even in the darkness, someone was watching, paying attention to what truly mattered. The truth. When I lost the love of my life, I thought the worst had already happened. I thought grief was the end of the road. But what came after was crueler than any grave. It was abandonment, coldness dressed as care, loneliness disguised as concern. They said it was for my own good, that I needed rest, that the world outside was too dangerous. But in truth, they were just slowly erasing me, snuffing out my light like a candle, hoping no one would notice when the flame was gone. But God saw, and He always sends someone. He never leaves us completely alone. And in that locked room, where time had no name and the days blurred together, He sent Ethan, not with armor or speeches, but with something far more powerful: compassion, a pure heart, honest eyes, and the courage to stand against what so many adults would rather ignore. When that note slid under the door, something inside me came back to life. "I'm here. Don't give up." It wasn't just words. It was as if someone had reached out their hand and whispered, "You still matter. You are still loved." And in that moment, I knew I wasn't alone. My story would not end there. Ethan saved me, not just from the isolation, but from being erased. He reminded me that my voice still matters, that my memories are worth honoring, that my life deserves space. With his skateboard, his phone, and his fierce heart, he recorded every injustice. He brought the truth to those who could do something. And when the authorities finally knocked on that door, it wasn't just a rescue, it was a liberation. I walked out with my head high, not because I won a battle, but because I reclaimed who I was. Now, every morning feels like a gift. Every beam of sunlight through the windows of my new home is a reminder that life can begin again, even when you thought it was over. Here, surrounded by quiet and flowers, I found the peace I thought I had lost forever. And every week, when Ethan brings me new seeds to plant, I smile with gratitude. Not just for him, but for myself, for holding on, for believing, for blooming again. Yes, the world can be cruel, and sometimes the worst hurt comes from the ones we once held in our arms. But miracles exist. There are grandchildren who become heroes. There are days when faith defeats pain. There are endings that are really just new beginnings. And now I know it. Doesn't matter who tried to bury me. They forgot I was a seed. And seeds grow. They rise. They bloom even brighter when watered with real love. If this story touched your heart, please like this video, subscribe to the channel, and share it with someone who might need a little hope today. Your support helps us tell more stories like this, real stories that deserve to be heard. And get ready, because in the next video, you'll meet a grandmother who started her life over after discovering a devastating betrayal inside her own home. What she did next will leave you speechless. I'll see you there.